This is CityCast Twin Cities. I'm Sean McPherson, and here's what the cities are talking about. Andy, what is your favorite state park?
Okay, I'm going to go with Afton State Park. I'll admit I had to think about national. What is national? What is a forest? What is a park? But I love Afton because it is accessible wildness. There are more beautiful places in our state, but it's like, what is it, like 30 minutes from my house or something? And I can get out in the wild, which is a real contrast to what it's like living in Chicago, where I came from.
Speaking of accessible wildness, Hans, what is your favorite state park?
I appreciate that intro. That's really good. My favorite state park, I would say, if not Cascade River State Park, way up north near Grand Marais, it would have to be Frontenac, which, to Andy's point, someplace close, gorgeous vistas, the eagles when they're flying. Like, there's so much to Frontenac that's just really special, and it's so accessible for just an afternoon.
I am Team William O'Brien, but there's a bounty of great state parks here in the Twin Cities, and I'm asking about that today because today is the birthday of Jacob V. Brower. He's credited with locating the headwaters of the Mississippi and launching the Minnesota State Parks system. Now, on today's episode, we're not just talking about parks. We're talking about a change in policy from the cities, St. Paul and Minneapolis, to accommodate for the impacts of ICE's presence in those cities. We're also going to talk about how the centrality of social media is changing the role of political leaders, and we're going to open up that mailbag to find a truly diverse set of opinions about how we're doing. We also encourage you to stay tuned. At the end of the episode, Brooke Rivers will be joining us for a conversation sponsored by Reading Partners. Now, Hans, you are old news. You've been on the podcast a bunch of times. You're an award-winning podcast producer, and I think you could power your house just with your hand gestures that you do when you talk on this podcast. But for the first time, we're welcoming in Andy McDaniel, who is the Chief Creative Officer of CityCast. Andy, you are in the C-suite, but you also live in the Twin Cities, and I'm so glad that you're stepping in and joining us for an episode. So first off, welcome to CityCast Twin Cities.
I'm so excited to join you guys today.
Andy, I'm going to find out if you're the type of person who has had your car towed many times. My guess is that you have. My guess is that you have had your car towed and Hans hasn't. But before we do that, I just kind of want to get a sense. I'm just being honest here. I want to get a sense of what it's like to launch a CityCast in your own hometown as opposed to setting up one from a distance, which is what you've done before.
Totally different, Sean. So CityCast Twin Cities is my 15th CityCast to have set up. After 5 years, I finally got to help start one in a town that I know really, really well. Totally different experience in so many ways. I guess because I just feel so much more personally connected to the content, and I have so many more opinions about some of the nuances of what we cover and how we cover it, which I think makes me 20% more annoying to the team making this great show. But it also means I really appreciate things like, for instance, honestly, just how you all have been showing up over the last few weeks in this incredibly intense moment in the Twin Cities. I really understand what it feels like to be here right now, and for you all to be using this platform that we have to do this work, connecting neighbors. So it makes me that much more proud. So more proud, more annoying.
Nothing really connects neighbors like everybody getting your car towed on a day when you all forgot to move to the correct side of the street or a similar thing. But now there is a totally different valence to cars being towed in the Twin Cities, because a lot of times the cars that have been towed weren't sort of, mistakenly left someplace they weren't supposed to be, but rather the people who were in that car were detained by ICE, perhaps for a moment and perhaps for a lifetime. And regardless, it is really changing how these cities in Minneapolis and St. Paul are relating to towing cars. So first off, let's see if my prognostication is right. Andy, have you had your car towed numerous times in your life?
I want to point out to start in defense, not recently.
You've already said yes. I just want to be clear.
Recently,
exactly.
Okay?
Yeah.
I also want to point out that in Chicago, or at least the part of Chicago I was living in previously, they don't tow your car to a lot like they do here. They move it. So you find out that your car has actually just been relocated, which is like kind of nice in a way. I have had it towed a number of times, different cars, different times. One time, memorably, when I was living in this teeny tiny apartment in Lowry Hill, It was towed while I was in the house, so I saw it departing,
Ugh.
2 wheels up,
Ugh.
and still had to chase it down. I will say that was in 2002-ish, probably. At the time, Uber and Lyft didn't exist. I have to say, great for a situation in which you get your car towed. You don't have to have friends in order to find a way to pick up your car from the tow lot. So,
All right.
Progress.
So Andy is frequently towed and friendless. Hans, tell me about your history of getting your car towed.
I've never had my car towed in the Twin Cities. I feel proud of that. I have had my car towed before, but never in the Twin Cities.
So in response to ICE's presence in the Twin Cities, and specifically in response to ICE's actions often resulting in abandoned cars, St. Paul and Minneapolis are looking to help out some drivers who have had to abandon their vehicles, or drivers who in the future may have to abandon their vehicle. So St. Paul is going to temporarily pause towing abandoned vehicles, but there's a big caveat. If they have to move it because it's in an emergency lane, or if it's in a spot where it's really not safe, they will still tow that vehicle. Minneapolis is doing a similar thing. They will release your towed car at no cost if you were detained by ICE, but you will need to provide some evidence that you are the owner of the car and some evidence that you were detained. This is not the biggest problem that the Twin Cities are facing. On the other hand, if it's your car that's in question, this is, I think, welcome news. But I want to ask first, Andy, what do you think of this development in the policies for Minneapolis and St. Paul?
I mean, I think what strikes me is just it's what they can do. There's so many examples right now of institutions, individuals, neighborhoods stepping up to demonstrate compassion in this moment. And here are the governments of Minneapolis and St. Paul sort of using certain bureaucratic creativity to bring a little bit of compassion to a situation. Sure, it's a small thing. It's a logistical thing. I don't know what it costs these days, $200, $300. Like, it's something. It obviously is not addressing the behemoth problem that we're all facing right now. It's nibbling around the edges, but it's what they can do. And so I appreciate it.
I'm glad you say nibbling around the edges, Andy, because this is what worries me about this, is that I'm reading a news article within the past 48 hours about tear gas being thrown into a car that a child is in. And then I'm reading Minneapolis, good luck, you can get your car out for free. And I'm going, is there a time where the main things are so stressful that we shouldn't even nibble? There is only time for big bites right now. Hans, are you on the position of we should do what we can as municipal leaders and to try to make life as livable as possible? Or do you by any chance subscribe to the kind of don't normalize this? Let's not get used to this. Let's not fix what happens when you get detained. Let's stop people from being detained in the first place.
I'm a little bit more in that second camp. I understand that if the car's a safety hazard, it has to be moved. But I think there's something really poignant about ICE coming up on someone, pulling them out of their car, leaving that car in the middle of Snelling or Broadway or Central or something, and no one touching it. And it just everything backs up and creates snarls. Creating these sorts of spaces of disruption is a pretty time-honored tradition. And it's very clear what's happening because they're not taking any responsibility for them. And so if the city says, but this is your problem, feds, you got to figure this out.
So you're kind of taking the position of not towing could be some form of a statement of sort of saying, look at this visible representation of what's happening in our city. Andy and Hans, I want to submit an idea for perhaps this new time that the towing folks in the cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis might have on their hand. If they're doing less towing, could we consider them sort of throwing the book at ICE agents and towing their cars all the time? So were they to be parked in a 15-minute spot for 16 minutes, you tow their cars? And this, I bring this up as sort of the Al Capone treatment, where Al Capone was doing murderous, terrible things in the city of Chicago and beyond, but all they were able to get him on was, not paying his taxes. And is there an idea that although the ICE agents are doing things that are really objectionable to me personally, as somebody who lives in St. Paul, is there an idea that Another way that the city can communicate that you are not welcome here, which we have heard our mayors in both cities say, is by actually just really being a thorn in their side as far as towing their cars. Is there any defense to that as a policy for St. Paul and Minneapolis? I'll ask Andy first.
I don't know the rules around this, Sean. And obviously, we're operating in a place of kind of having to push on a lot of the rules and move into a space of being disruptive because it's kind of all we have as a city is to gum up the works. I will suggest, and I'm mostly being funny here, but this tactic that Chicago has of relocating cars, I feel like we might be able to leverage that tactic here. We don't have to take these cars to the impound lot. Maybe we could relocate them somewhere that also gums up the works. I don't know exactly how that works, but let me just say it's really confusing to have to try and find your car. So maybe it needs to end up somewhere that's annoying.
I think in some ways these are monuments to what's happening. And I think instead of being a defensive move of like gumming up the works, it can be an indicative move of what the cost is when ICE does this sort of thing. I would love to see where community members were finding the places these cars were and lovingly and carefully marking why this car is in this spot and hasn't moved. Can we make them into art exhibits? Can we make them into some sort of display that lines our streets with these reminders when you're driving down the street that this is where people are taken, this is what happens?
We'd love to hear from you. What do you think of this temporary city policy on towing? And what do you think the most annoying place to have your car towed to would be? Send us a text or leave us a voicemail on the CityCast Twin Cities hotline. That number is 612-217-0637. We'll be right back after a quick break. Minnesota Opera is presenting My Name is Florence, running January 31st through February 8th at the Ordway in downtown St. Paul. This is a world premiere, a brand new opera by composer B.E. Boykin and St. Paul-based librettist Harrison David Rivers. The opera tells the story of Florence Price, an American composer who was the first Black woman to have a symphony performed by a major U.S. orchestra. The opera also explores themes of identity, creativity, family, legacy, and resilience. It's great for audiences who are newer to opera. They got a catchy score that includes influences from musical styles like jazz, gospel, R&B, and hip-hop. This piece will be the first of several premieres from Minnesota Opera's New Works initiative to see the stage over the next several seasons. Minnesota Opera is one of the leading opera companies in the United States when it comes to premiering new works. Previous commissions like Silent Night have received national recognition. In fact, the composer won a Pulitzer Prize. We're right here in your backyard. Join us and be a part of history. We've talked about the first big news stories that were impacted by the telegram, by a daily paper, by the radio, by the TV. And by the way, I'm talking about on the international level, things like Krakatoa or the Nixon-Kennedy debates. But how we consume news always changes how the news makers react. Right now, we're in this caption era, where a lot of us are learning about things that are happening in Venezuela, in Iran, and right here in the Twin Cities in these short captioned videos. And now, Hans Buetow, I did call you old news earlier on the show. And I apologize for that because you continue to create a lot of really relevant content, especially when it comes to how the internet engages with real life. And you host a show and produce a show called Never Post. And you recently actually had our friend, M. Castle, who is from Racket and is also a contributor here on CityCast Twin Cities, to help people understand some connections between fraud and ICE activity in Minnesota and how the federal response, tying them together, actually relies upon a lot of the media that we're consuming right now. Just Tuesday morning, there was 10 posts in the 1 a.m. hour on the Truth Social network that Trump prefers for his social media posting. There is a big addiction for so many of us to social media, and that doesn't rule out the leaders at the top of government at every level. But Hans, you wanted to highlight some things that go deeper than just a personal addiction to social media and rather kind of a recalibration on how leaders engage with us and with social media. Tell me about it.
Yeah, that's right, because it's not just an addiction for leadership, and because addiction should not be overlooked, but it's yes and to that. So the day before Renee Good was killed, I was reading a bunch online from these 4 thinkers who do a lot of writing about internet and politics, internet and culture. You had Charlie Warzel was writing in The Atlantic. You had Don Moynihan and Cooper Lund, who are both bloggers who have their own blogs. And you have Ryan Broderick, who writes a newsletter called Garbage Day. And on the same day, or roughly the same day, all 4 of those people came out independently and simultaneously with roughly the same conclusion, bringing a bunch of ideas together. And those ideas circle this main idea that the people at the highest levels of leadership in our government think that their primary job is creating content. And so this is a more intense version than just posting, right? So this says that power is centered around and wielded by people who get attention online, right? So there's a big part of our political rulers, it's the only thing that they really know how to do or respect, right? The head of our FBI, the former deputy head of our FBI, both of them are podcasters. That's their qualification. The head of the DOD is a news presenter. These are people who are steeped in content. It's how they got the jobs that they have. It's how the successors to these people are going to get their jobs in this administration. And so creating content is the currency of power right now. Don Moynihan, who's one of the bloggers who worked on this idea, used this term that I love, which is clicktatorship, as a way to define this phenomenon. And so he says that this clicktatorship leads to really big changes in behavior. It's not just a symptom, it's actually a cause. It leads to conflicts between their professional and their online identities, that those two things don't match. It degrades all the professional norms in a lot of these spaces. Work practices get worse. It's recruiting others who are high on the meme supply, as he says, to work in the government. We see that people are auditioning for their roles by posting. And critically, it alters decision-making to be responsive to social media. So Charlie Warzel from The Atlantic, he talked about it as a culture of reaction videos. I think that's a super helpful framework. So these memes, these reactions about the news that everybody starts posting, those are happening simultaneously with the news events. You no longer have news event, reaction. Those two things are super linked. So when you're responding, the conversation has already moved on and it's already self-referential and it's already been memeified. And what this does is it creates opportunities for content, but it also distances the audience from any direct action. So he says in this, quote, "The process is nihilistic and it has a dehumanizing effect. Stories about people or countries in conflict become abstract, buried under a pile of memes and recursive references that exist for little more than scroll-by entertainment."
When you talk about specifically how the meme is being formed at the same time that the news event is transpiring, what do you mean? What's an example of that?
So each of these guys were writing this and noticed this after the same event, which was Maduro being ousted forcefully in Venezuela. And all of them saw the images from the quote unquote situation room that had been created at Mar-a-Lago. And there's these images specifically of these men trying to look intense, just like when Obama was in the room when they got bin Laden. So they're staging these images. But in the background, there's this screen that has Twitter with just Venezuela in the search bar. They are watching the public Twitter reaction, the X reaction to it. And that's what they have up in the situation room, is Twitter's reaction to it. And so all these guys kind of took that and went, hey, wait a second. These guys, it's all self-recursive, right? And so you think about the Nick Shirley video that was the cause of a lot of the most recent stuff around here, which was when Nick Shirley, this very young man, comes in and starts going to all of these different daycares around the Twin Cities saying, where are the kids? Just literally hammering on doors and demanding to see children. And he makes this video saying there's rampant fraud, $110 million in fraud. Oh my goodness. Immediately, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, Kash Patel of the FBI, all these people start posting. Kristi Noem of the DHS posts that they're going to investigate it immediately. And Abigail Jackson, who is a spokesperson at the White House, puts out a statement that says, quote, "The country should be deeply appreciative to Shirley for shining a light on this issue. The legacy media should take notes." It's got millions of views. All this stuff is happening. Trump then goes and orders the health department to freeze $185 million in childcare payments based on this video. And it takes the Minnesota Department of Children, Youth, and Families maybe another week to do the compliance reports, where they come back and they say everything is operating as expected. But by then, we've already moved on, and the images are all about 2,000 troops from ICE coming into the Twin Cities, and that's no longer relevant to the conversation. Washington Post did a really interesting analysis in December about this, where they tracked an ICE public affairs team working in October of last year. So they were down in Houston. They did 120 stops in a very short amount of time. And then in all these series of chats, they had all these conversations about how best to position these to get maximum virality. How do we change the framework if all of these people aren't criminals? Oh, well, we just talk about how we're working hard for American values. What kind of music do we think is going to have the most impact on the constituency that we want? They were coordinating directly with the White House during this to, quote, flood the airwaves with this content, which is a huge departure for how public affairs teams have been used for any of these agencies before. Like, no one has ever done this with an agency before, but now we're seeing it. And so we see this very close relationship between the decision that gets made coming after the content that gets made about it.
Hans, right now, obviously I consume a lot more information than the stuff you're giving me right now. But at this moment, one could think of this, by what you've said, as like a right-wing phenomenon. You've mainly talked about people in the right wing, but a lot of folks are on social media, right? And I think a lot about how a lot of leaders, many of them Democratic, in Minnesota, hop to it after the Nick Shirley video as well. Sometimes in unsexy ways, like we're going to send folks around to check on these childcare things. And again, the news cycle has sort of moved beyond it by the time they get to it. I think it's really egregious when you are staging a raid based on how it's going to look on camera. But do you see this happening on all sides of the political spectrum?
I don't, actually.
Okay. Spicy.
I think that you're absolutely right, and I don't want to dismiss the fact that there are people looking for imagined internet points on from all spectra, because that's how you function in a political society at this point. Is you have to be posting, must be posting. I think the difference with this is that you're using the levers of power to make decisions to make posts. So the emphasis is not on law. It's not on rights. It's not on constituency. It's not on people. The decisions of what to do with policy, with action, with executive orders, with all that stuff is directly to create content to make good posts. I think that they are shadows of the same, but I think what this is it's a step beyond just being a hyper poster, just being somebody who's on all the time. It's actually changing your behavior to manufacture things that look like posts, irrespective of the consequences they have in the wider world.
I'm curious, Hans, as you think about how this applies to the events that have been transpiring in the Twin Cities in the last few weeks,
yeah,
who do you think is winning the narrative right now? Because I will say I can't trust my algorithm, right? But when I look at Instagram, I'm seeing a combination of both just like incredibly gripping, compelling videos of what's transpiring in on the more horrifying side. And I'm also seeing these moments of joy. You know, I went into a meeting this morning with folks from around the country who all were familiar with the art sled rally and specifically the de-icer sled coming down the hill. I feel like there is an element of the narrative that actually folks on the ground in the Twin Cities are controlling quite effectively right now. And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Andy, because it's one of the things that I think is surprising the administration right now. And over the weekend, something came out that maybe seems a little bit small, but I think when you look at it in the context of this clicktatorship idea and this framework that they're doing it for the gram, I really think you can start to see how there's some pretty intense stuff happening at the higher levels in terms of how they see what they're doing on the ground here. Axios reported over the weekend that they were talking to senior level people in the Trump administration, people who are close to him. And I'm going to read you the quote that they put in from this person about Trump's feelings about the optics specifically of what they're doing on the ground in Minnesota. Quote, I wouldn't say he's concerned about the policy. He wants deportations. He wants mass deportations. What he doesn't want is what people are seeing. He doesn't like the way it looks. It looks bad, so he's expressed some discomfort about that. There's the right way to do this, and it doesn't look like the right way to a lot of people. I think this is really big in that context, right? Because we've been arguing a lot over the last few days. You look at like the Jonathan Ross, the shooter of Renee Good, you look at that POV video that he shot on his own phone that they put out as very much like, well, this exonerates him. And everybody saw something different in that, in a way that is very challenging to understand. From that, I felt like I saw a lot of these references to George Orwell in 1984, of people saying like, of people quoting and saying, the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. And everybody saying like, no, this video clearly shows this thing as it happened. And they're claiming it as some sort of moral victory when it clearly shows the opposite. They're telling us to disbelieve our own eyes. No one has been more insistent than this administration that we do that sort of thing. And I think when they are pausing for even a moment to speculate and say, maybe we're not spinning this right. Maybe we can't spin this. That to me is something to really, really, really pay attention to.
I will say, I think content that is playing well right now is joy content and authentic, direct to camera. Here's what happened to me just now, and I'm uncomfortable telling you this, but I feel a responsibility to tell you this. So to the extent that sort of raw, intimate, firsthand experience can be effective storytelling and really rest the narrative, I think we got a lot of material to work with right now. So there is that.
That's the silver lining we were looking for, Andy. We appreciate you there.
Here for you.
We'd love to hear from you. What's a silver lining you've seen in person or perhaps on social media in the past couple of days? Send us a text or leave us a voicemail. The number is 612-217-0637. We love hearing from you, and we'd love to include your thoughts in an upcoming mailbag segment. We're about to open up our mailbag, but before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. Andy McDaniel, have you ever heard the adage that great leaders start out in the mailroom?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well,
did you just make that up?
No, it's like you always hear people like, now I run Hewlett Packard, but I started out as a 19-year-old in the mailroom. And then you always find out that it was like Jack Hewitt, who did 2 months in the mailroom and then became the CEO when he was like 24. But given that you're in the C-suite, I thought it'd be a fun time for you to actually join us in the mailroom for a moment. So Andy, if you will you help us open up our mailbag?
Okay, to be clear, I think if you're working in the mailroom, you're not supposed to be reading the mail. That's not the job. But
I got fired a couple times for that. So.
Okay, it's a little invasive. Okay. So first of all, we got a note from Josh, who thanked us for our coverage and actually also for our ads. He said, hello, I wanted to say how thankful I am for your team sharing information on the Twin Cities in such an in-depth yet concise way, especially regarding ICE. It's very difficult to find a place to get reliable information with all the different outlets, but your team goes above and beyond. So a big thank you to the whole team at the Twin Cities CityCast. Also, thank you to whoever coordinates your ads, Heather, because they've been knocking it out of the park. I love my Aura frame, and that book you just recommended, The Ascent, was absolutely captivating. I blew through it in a week. Thanks again, Josh. I hope our potential future advertisers are hearing this from Josh. It's true. I mean, we say it like we mean it because we mean it, and it really works. So.
When people say AI is all bad, I just want to disagree because I created Josh as an AI chatbot to be enthusiastic about CityCast Twin Cities. And Josh, you're doing a great job. Thank you, Josh. Hans, we got a text from Rich. What was that all about?
Rich sent in a text, which I love a text. Love a text. And you can send in a text too. So Rich says, thank you so much for your news and support of our community during these difficult times. My daughter is an ESL teacher in MPS. Her burden is heavy, taking care of students. Please give a shout out to teachers who are just doing their jobs. I think, Rich, you just did. So can we +1 Rich and say, just
truly
Yeah, teachers who are, especially now, having to move to partially maybe hybrid, having to coordinate safety, having to just do all of the things that are being done. It is, in a lot of ways, once again, the front lines of a really scary thing.
Yeah. Social workers, too. I'm hearing about so many social workers who are organizing food and hygiene drives for their neighborhoods. It's really, they go above and beyond.
I want to close the mailbag with a relatively critical note, but a thoughtful note that we got from Nate last week that I wanted to share. And the pretext of this email is we were talking about the shooting by an ICE agent of someone in North Minneapolis that went on to many protests that night. And we covered a lot of that in the next morning in conversations with our producer, Adam Sage. And I want to share what Nate wrote and then respond, because I don't agree with everything that Nate said, but I want to engage with it. So Nate wrote, "Hey, you understand this man was a violent criminal, right? Like multiple offender, will reoffend till the end type of fellow. I respect that ICE is on a terror campaign with minimal results. It's horrible, but what was more horrible in this particular situation was an assault on a public servant, and that this Venezuelan man was never reported by our local system to federal systems for deportation for his previous crimes. It sucks what ICE is doing, but that doesn't mean we need to love and honor violent criminals. Enough of that. Thanks, Nate." I want to be thoughtful to Nate. I also want to be thoughtful to the situation and the lack of information that not only we had at the time, but even that we have now. And this was a rapidly evolving situation, but we know a lot more about it than we did at the time of broadcasting this episode. And I got to tip my hat to the Minnesota Reformer, who has been on top of this locally. That man is named Julio Cesar Sosa Silas, and he was an undocumented immigrant from Venezuela, but he was not the same man that agents were initially pursuing. And what's important in this moment, at least what I want to say to Nate, is that I don't believe that we had the information to, at that time or now, to paint the person who was shot as a multiple offender, will reoffend till the end type of fellow. And even when we're hearing information stating that that person is this type, it's generally not supported by anything that actually isn't a category of offender. And trying to share the information that we are positive on and clear on should not be confused with saying that we love and honor violent criminals. Trying to do an honorable job of covering what we know and trying to do an honorable job of not painting somebody into a particular corner because of an unsupported tweet that night from representatives at DHS. So in my opinion, Nate, what I want to let you know is that we attempted to not jump to conclusions, and I hope that you can attempt to not jump to conclusions, both on the people involved, but also on our coverage in the future, because I didn't hear things in our coverage that said we need to love and honor violent criminals. And I think if you listen again, Nate, you might also hear the absence of that statement. Even with my disagreements with Nate's note to us, I do want to thank Nate for writing us, because having this type of dialogue is really essential to what we're trying to do here at CityCast Twin Cities. And I encourage you, if you have thoughts about our coverage, to really do what Nate did and chime in and share it. You'll be heard respectfully and you'll be responded to. So we really appreciate Nate, even if I do disagree with some of the message that he sent us. And last but not least, Brooke Rivers, Executive Director of Reading Partners, will be joining us for a sponsored interview. Hey, it's Sean here. I'm with Brooke Rivers, Executive Director of Reading Partners. And Brooke, I am no stranger to you or to Reading Partners. I've actually been a host for your Spelling Bee for numbers of years, and it's awesome to be with you today. Welcome to CityCast Twin Cities.
Thank you so much, Sean. It is a pleasure to be with you today as well.
Now, I'm familiar with Reading Partners, and I think it's a beautiful organization. But for folks who don't know what y'all do, what is Reading Partners?
So Reading Partners is an education nonprofit that invests in youth by recruiting and training volunteers to train them as tutors to provide individualized literacy instruction in elementary schools here in Minnesota. We know that reading isn't a skill that comes naturally to kids and humans. In fact, like language and speech, it needs to be explicitly taught. And we know from national and state data that only 32% of fourth graders are reading at grade level right now. So there are a lot of students across this state and across the country that could benefit from more specialized and individualized instruction. We partner with those schools and provide tutoring at no cost to those students.
And one really cool thing is that it's not just sort of grabbing a book off the shelf and crossing your fingers and hoping that helps a young person learn how to read. You guys are fulfilling a need, but you're also doing it efficiently and with the best research possible. Can you talk a little bit about what a typical tutoring session includes and how it works for both parties?
Absolutely. Well, tutoring happens throughout the school day, Monday through Thursday. And once a tutor and a student are paired up, they work together for 45 minutes using a structured research-based curriculum. So that's what you're getting at. We're not just kind of giving tutors, a student and saying, good luck to you, hope things go well, but we're providing a curriculum that's structured. In fact, it's scripted out so that a tutor doesn't have to guess and wonder what to do or what to say when they're working on a skill with a student. So the lesson starts with a little bit of reading by the tutor. They're reading from a book that a student has chosen. So it's hopefully of high interest to the student. And then the pair moves into the skills part of the lesson. And so they're working on a skill, depending on what that student needs. And then finally, at the end of the lesson, the student is actually modeling then the work that they were just doing with their tutor and practicing that skill in a book or a text to continue working on that mastery of the skill.
Now, Brooke, I got to say, whenever I've been connected to reading partners at the events I've been at, I see how student-centered you are, and that's a really beautiful thing. There's a lot of organizations in the world of education that aren't as student-centered as you are. So I just want to ask you, what do the students who actually connect with these tutors think about reading partners?
Yeah, there's a ton of enthusiasm from students for the program. And in fact, when we go and pick up a student from the classroom for their tutoring session, there are multiple hands going up saying, can I come? Is it my turn? Is it my turn to come to Reading Partners? But this is a story that a tutor shared. He was working with a fifth grade student who came to the reading center, hesitant reader, not very excited about it, clearly did not like school. And as a fifth grader was already talking about the transition to sixth grade and how he was not looking forward to that at all. But over time and, starting with building a relationship and just getting to know the student and moving through the year and through the lessons, the tutor found that the student really enjoyed learning about science and in particular space. So starting with that kind of concept and those interest areas, they started digging in and enjoying kind of learning about space and other science things through text and through literature. And by the end of the year, the student was now tackling all kinds of topics in the Reading Center, engaging in their lessons with different enthusiasm, kind of a renewed energy and confidence. And at the end of the year, the student shared with their tutor that they were actually looking forward to sixth grade.
Brooke, that is a prime example of meeting a student where they are and figuring out how to get to the next step, which is just
Exactly.
part and parcel of what you do. You've removed a lot of the barriers to entry for somebody who's thinking about volunteering, because it's clear that I don't just have to know the perfect way to teach a kid how to read already. There's actually a lot of support from reading partners. So if I'm interested in volunteering, what's that next step to get started? And do I need particular experience to become a tutor?
Right. No experience needed. I'll start there. Willingness and time are really the two things that we're asking for from volunteers. Easy to sign up if you go to our website at readingpartners.org. And then if you kind of toggle under the Get Involved menu item, you can click volunteer and follow the steps there.
And you mentioned that it can really just be an hour a week, but I got to be honest, for some folks, that still might be too much to tackle. If somebody does want to be committed and involved, but can't do an hour each week, what are other ways they can help Reading Partners?
Well, maybe you can't volunteer, but maybe you know some other folks that can. I would be remiss if not to say we are a nonprofit. And so, if you can't give of your time, maybe your treasure. And so supporting us financially is always a great way to support.
Brooke, I thank you for being here. On top of that, I know you aren't a fly-by-night person. You've been with this organization for quite some time, and your commitment to this mission is really tangible today and throughout my times working with you. So first, thanks for being with CityCast, and also thanks for what you do with Reading Partners.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thanks for this opportunity, and thanks for all that you're doing.
You can check out readingpartners.org to learn more. We're going to have that link for you in our show notes as well, so you're just a click away, and thanks for listening. That's all for today here on CityCast Twin Cities. I'm your host, Sean McPherson, Hans Buetow, Andy McDaniel. Thanks for being here today. You can get more news delivered right to your inbox by subscribing to the CityCast Twin Cities newsletter. If you enjoyed today's show, why not share this podcast with someone who's never had their car towed? We'll see you back here tomorrow for more news from around the city.